Hello and welcome. Today we will explore the future of work, or the future of me, as I think we've all been sort of discussing. Actually, there is no work and life balance anymore. There is just oneself. So yeah, we've brought together an illustrious panel to discuss this subject across three core themes today of technology, people, and more broadly transformation. Clearly, technology is disrupting the way that we work, but is this change for the good of the people? Is it considered, positive progress that frees up our workforce to focus on the jobs that better fulfill us? Or are we becoming slaves to the constant drive for efficiency, of transparency, of productivity, of maximizing performance? What is the ultimate outcome on this race for innovation and performance? What does the future hold for the workforce of the future? And how can we set them up for success? There are plenty of questions, and I'm sure the panel will chomping at the bit with many answers. I'm really looking forward to an informative and stimulating debate. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our panel. So Jane Ginnever is a founder, facilitator, change consultant, and a non-exec director. I've had the privilege of working with Jane before, and she's got a very considered approach and an impressive focus on organisational change, which she mixes up with a thoughtful but often thought-provoking attitude. And I'm really looking forward to Jane's vantage point on this topic today. So welcome to you, Jane. Nicole Yershon. So, Nicole's joining us for another discussion, which hopefully you will tune in for. Nicole's one of the Drum's 25 women who shaped the digital industry in the last 25 years. She is a maverick, an inspiration, and the original rough diamond. A super connector, a coach, a mover, and a shaker. So yeah, welcome to you, Nicole. And we've also got Kalpesh Baxi. Kalpesh, again, I've had the pleasure of working with before, and Kalpesh has had the opportunity to see how the world of work has changed with new roles being created. Kalpesh's background is in HR recruitment. He's been an advisor, an investor, and a non-exec director, and been involved with several organisations, including Smart Tribe, the Entrepreneurs Club. I know you're doing lots of great work at the moment, Kalpesh, supporting people and business, and I'm looking forward to hearing more about that shortly. So welcome to you all. Thank you very much for joining us today at Webgains Transform 2020. So I'm going to start off with you, Jane, if that's all right. I'd like, really looking forward to hearing your view on this topic. So how can we build kind of good business for the future? I know it's a bit of an open-ended question, but I thought you'd enjoy that as a starter for 10.
Yeah, there's lots to get my teeth into there, isn't there? Thanks, Natasha. I was just reading the FT this morning, and Andrew Hill, their managing editor, was talking about the pandemic causing a reboot, a forced reboot, he called it, of work and the way that we do things. And as you'd expect from us having worked together before, I think that's been long overdue. There are so many people in organisations have been disengaged when organisations not achieving their potential, and so it really was time that we did something different. So how do we build good businesses for the future? I think we need to reflect back on all of the stuff that we've learned already about organisations, but perhaps ignored. The way that we run businesses, have been running businesses, is quite antiquated. It's set back in the Industrial Revolution almost. The origins of it, and I think what's been proven by the changes that very quickly had to be put in place as a result of the COVID-19 is that some of our assumptions which were underpinning the way we were working in organisations were false. So this idea that people couldn't be trusted, very kind of McGregor's Theory X way of running organisations, of thinking about people, that people can't be trusted, that they need a carrot or stick to be able to do anything, that they need that kind of external motivation, really proved to be false. And so many employees, I think, have really surprised the leadership teams within their companies, and that's causing all of these organisations now to kind of push back against the government, saying, let's get people back into the workplace. And they're saying, well, I don't think that's actually what we need as a business. So to build good businesses going forward, I think we need to stop perhaps looking for new solutions and reflect on all of the good work that's been done already, and how we can listen to that, how we can involve people in creating the future of the business, and really build organizations with a different model, a different assumptions underpinning it, that people can be trusted, that they are self-motivated and just need the right conditions to be able to do their best work. And this idea of efficiency, I don't think we should throw it out, but I think we need to look at organizational efficiency perhaps, rather than this focus on individual efficiency that we've done so far. So focusing on how organizations and teams work together in the best way possible and enabling that to happen. Oh, sorry, Natasha, I can't hear you.
Mute.
Thank you, Jane. That's really informative, and lots to unpick in there. I think, you know, there's been conversations kind of about, you know, how the education system is still stuck in the Victorian era, and it's interesting because you and I think have been having this debate on various stages for the last, you know, 2, 3, 4, maybe even 5 years now. You know, we've been talking about, you know, people sat there at their metaphorical lathe, you know, all these conversations about, you know, about efficiency. And I know you always come at it from an operational perspective, which you know, which is looking at the operational efficiency, but putting the individual first, you know, which I think is so important. And Nicole, actually, it's probably a good opportunity to move to you in terms of the individual. You know, what do you think are the skill sets, and with your experience, I know you kind of worked across so many different organisations and been so, you know, positive and pro kind of individual growth. But what do you think the skill sets are that the future, you know, generation are going to need to kind of be able to kind of continuously transform?
Yeah, I mean, I think Jane touched on it with the word trust, because with this work from anywhere, not just work from home, but I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I've been working for the last 4 years from anywhere, whether it be in another country, or so. I think that trust word from leadership needs to be really taken seriously, where they really do need to understand that they give their employees a job to do and trust that they do it. I think the next 10 to 20 years, it's reasonable to assume that work as we know it will have dramatically changed. Automation, rote processes are going to be done by digital systems. I mean, I implemented digital systems in 2000 and took Ogilvy at the time from an analog world to a digital world. And, you know, literally that was one of my biggest nightmares, you know, implementation of digital systems and moving away from handwritten notes, etc. So I think that will still continue and more so, and get quicker. And shifts in what work actually means, skills that schools and universities don't even know about yet, with teaching, job titles that will have HR departments flummoxed, that they haven't even thought of. I mean, I remember when we set up our Rough Diamonds scheme, which I can talk about later, when HR, and I made up a job role for one of our Rough Diamonds, which was creative lab technologist. And HR at the time said, well, what's that? And what's the job spec, and how much? And I literally was like, I'll make it up as I go along. I don't know, because we've never needed it. So I think that need for open-mindedness and open-heartedness from HR is important. I think it depends on definition of creativity. So for me, it's the ability to identify and solve challenges, and it's not necessarily a department that's within an organisation. I think there's a mentality that's built on a number of things, which is curiosity to get to the root of any apparent situation, the ability and capacity to unlearn what happened yesterday. So we have knowledge and we think we know, but that's going to be different to what we need to learn tomorrow. So not be stuck with the knowledge that that's the right way to go, when actually there's a whole new way that we need to unlearn to learn. So I think, those are the main things that I always kind of keep my eyes on, and have actually had the pain of working through as Kalpesh, you'll understand, as an entrepreneur, that's always been my role, being an entrepreneurial spirit within very large organizations, and constantly asking why and questioning, in that curiosity was always at the forefront of how I was looking at change happening. So I remember very clearly working with an organisation and saying to them, why do you have to pay so much rent on this building? Why can't we operate a leveraged business model where you're not necessarily paying for all your staff, you're harnessing the power of the gig economy? And I was literally laughed out of the office. This was maybe about 4 years ago, because they wanted the bricks and mortar and they couldn't imagine working in any other way. And it took COVID to literally change them overnight, because they couldn't go back to doing what they were doing.
Yeah, I think that's so, that goes back to that point about trust, doesn't it? I think I've heard so many stories about organizations that had a 5-year plan to transfer a department to online working, a call center or something along those lines, and overnight they moved the call center on remote working, and the question then came back to the board, well, this clearly was not a technology challenge, this clearly was not an operational infrastructure problem, this was a challenge of culture, and of trust, and that was coming from the top down. And now you're hearing about, well, actually it's far more productive, and and you touched there again about that kind of that pace that you need within an organization. We talk a lot about entrepreneurs, but intrapreneurs, and Kalpesh, I know you've seen both sides of that now, kind of moving from within an organization to now being an entrepreneur yourself. What are your kind of views, I suppose, from a recruitment perspective? Would be fascinating, talking to Nicole there a little bit about skill set. What are you seeing in terms of the way that people are recruiting?
I think it's really interesting. I mean, I know Jane's point about trust is valuable, and the creativity thing is, you're right, it's not one job. So I think there's a bundle up there. So you're absolutely right. I went from a big company, a FTSE company, where it was about delivery, it was about recruitment and about staffing. The key thing I think is worth remembering is recruitment is just one subsector of a broader industry called workforce solutions, right? And the one thing I've noticed coming out of recruitment is the purpose that good recruiters, and I think we all know good and bad recruiters, and we can debate this forever. But the key thing is good recruiters can do 3 things, right? There's 100 things, but 3 key things. One, they have an uncanny ability of getting people back into the workplace. Recruiters have amazing networks and they're connected with organizations everywhere. So if you think about the challenges we're about to go into, which is displaced people in the wrong place, traditionally doing the wrong jobs, how do you move them to different places? Recruiters can actually help with that challenge. The second thing is about skilling and reskilling. So we're moving into an industry or in a world right now where, because you did one job, it doesn't mean you can't do a different job now. And I think people need to start thinking slightly differently. And the world of, and I think we had this conversation back in November when we were sitting on the panel about the future of work. Is it about the permanent employee? Well, actually, the reality is it's more about the gig employee now. So Nicole's vision might be coming true, actually, about people being able to do multiple different things. And I look at what I'm doing right now. I'm a gig star. Where does it sound?
Elon Musk calls them expert generalists.
There we go. Listen, if Elon says it, it must be right, okay, in terms of he's doing it in the right way. So I think there's a couple of different things. And the third thing that recruiters can do is challenge the traditional hiring methods. So the days of, you have to see someone, you have to take them through 6 different interviews. We're already seeing companies working differently around how they interview. you can't do face-to-face interviews. So what other tools do you have? How do you do competency-based interviewing now? And the one thing that came out of Davos this year was, if you think about the skilling economy and the reskilling economy, we have to start thinking differently around how we hire people, what we hire people to do, and what premise we hire people on. And I think one of the key things that if you look at the World Economic Forum Future of Work report, their vision is by 2030 or so, there's 133 million new jobs that will be created. We'll be losing 75 million, but net there are more jobs that will be created, which means we need to think differently about the talent that we hire. We need to be hiring on potential rather than this person's done it for the last 20 years. And going back to Nicole's point, a lot of the jobs coming through, we don't know because these people have never done these jobs before. And I think, one of the reports I read this week from Indeed, head of TikTok marketing is a fast growing job title. Yeah, no one knew what a head of TikTok marketing was going to be until about 3 months ago. So I think there are some challenges coming for the post. And the final part for me is diversity. And I think we can. The agenda is still up there. No one's getting it 100% right yet. So there's still a lot of scope in this. But diversity for me is how do you create an inclusive culture? And I know Jane talks about this quite a lot in terms of some of the seminars that she's attended. But diversity is about thought. So it's about cognitive diversity rather than hitting a quota around this type of person from this type of background. So how do we bring people with different thinking to come together to drive innovation and to actually drive an organisation forwards?
Yeah, there's again a lot to unpick there. Thank you, Kalpesh, and some clear themes that are coming through from all of you. Interestingly, we have got a separate panel discussion on kind of diversity and inclusion, but it's definitely something that I know you and I have spoken about before with Jane when we've kind of had these kind of discussions. But that kind of unconscious bias and different ways of recruiting now is fascinating in terms of the ways that we can recruit in a much more positive and proactive and inclusive way. But yeah, businesses are slow to kind of pick up on that. Jane, what are your thoughts in terms of the way that the businesses are kind of operating and the way that they are changing to look at the future, to look at these new roles that are opening up? Nicole's made the point that she just started, said, right, there's this new job role, it's called this, I don't know what it is. Is that becoming more and more common? How are organisations kind of becoming more kind of innovative and entrepreneurial in that kind of way?
Yeah, I think there are a number of different ways that organisations are starting to change. I think there is a move to something that feels more dynamic, but I see a lot of that in perhaps newer startups and fast-growing scale-ups that actually, it's easier to create something from a blank sheet of paper that operates in the way that you want it to. So that idea of, I love the idea of dynamic job roles and just, encouraging people to develop their own roles and allowing the system to enable that. I think it's really difficult sometimes to change an established business to something. This idea of a forced reboot gives us an opportunity to do something more dramatic, for sure. And I think the companies, the organizations that are really going to succeed in the future are those which are resilient, that can adapt and that can evolve going forward, so that an ability for every player within the business to be able to spot opportunities and take them, to develop themselves and their role, so the whole organization grows. It's not just about sales growth, is going to be really important. Being able to face up to the future and not deny it, to recognize that the future is unknown and we've got to live with this. So how do we create an organization which can adapt and evolve and doesn't need somebody at the top to spot it and then implement top-down change in order for the company to change its focus? So going back to, you know, what everybody has already said, that idea of greater inclusion, of more people being involved in the discussions about where the company's going and what it's got to do, and the idea of dispersed decision making is, I think, key too. So that idea that everybody's part of it. I was having a look at best companies to work for, the Sunday Times award. It's all about engagement really, but I was looking at some of the big companies that were coming in at the top of that list, and one of them was Admiral, and they've operated and have operated for years on really simple principles, which is that people who like what they do it better. You know, it's easy, it's nice, it's easy to remember. It's not a big ream of 12 values or something that people need to remember and hold people to account on, but that's been led from the top. So the chief exec, who took over from somebody else, so he's not the person that dreamt this up, but he's the person that's continuing to implement it. So there's that continuation of leadership, and continuation of the same messages coming out. So the whole of the organization is based around that. This idea of purpose as well on the back of that. It strikes me that there's a lot of people, I think before COVID-19, but I think it's accelerated the pace of it, considering actually how it is that they want to spend their lives, and they want to do that something that has meaning. So organizations, I think, we're already picking up on that. Unilever, for example, is a fantastic, you know, brand leader in that space, but they're looking at it from an employer's perspective as well as a brand's perspective. That idea that purpose is really important to all of us. So there's a number of different things, I think, that companies are doing to gear up for what they anticipate the workforce of the future needs. And I don't think personally that's a generational thing either. I think, you know, I'm in my 50s, and a lot of the stuff that's being talked about now is something that I've always wanted when working in an organization. And maybe a bit like Nicole, I've been a bit of a maverick when I've been inside organizations. But that idea that, you know, we want to work, we get a lot of fulfillment from our work, we get a lot from the people that we're working with, but we want to do work that seems important and we get recognized for and is rewarding in itself, I think is a really important idea for the companies going forward and how they build.
Absolutely, yeah. I think that, you know, that's very I was going to make a joke there. It's very admirable. I really love that, you know, concept. And it's something that I talk to my children about all the time. Why would you not, you know, explore that in a business? You know, we quite often talk about, you know, if you don't enjoy doing something, you know, keep practicing it, because the more you practice it, the better you'll get. The better you get, the more you enjoy it, the more you want to practice it. It becomes a virtuous circle. But in organizations, you know, you have the flexibility, you have the opportunity, you know, rather than as a child where you have to do certain things, you know, you have the opportunity to find the roles that you genuinely have a passion for, that you know, have a natural affinity to. And that's not about being in your comfort zone per se. That's about finding things, as you said, that give you that sense of purpose, that when you wake up on a Monday morning, you jump out of bed because you want to go to work, whether that's, you know, about stepping next door or you know, or sitting on the sofa and with your laptop, but you want to engage with your work, whatever that might be. I think that's such an interesting concept.
I kind of with HR for many years, I went the other direction to them. They used to do these 360 reviews for staff, and it was always, what are you not very good at? Let's get you better at that. Well, maybe you're just not good at that. So I would go with, I'd do these emotional intelligence testing years before they even kind of came out, and said, okay, you're not very good at that. That's not a key strength. Don't worry about it. It's somebody else's key strength. So it was a good way to work out my weaknesses with someone else's strengths and vice versa. And I don't think enough companies do that. They are still constantly bashing people of what they're not good at and make them feel bad, and they need to get better at that when that's not necessarily their skill.
Yeah, and I think as individuals, we're not that great at that, are we? Sometimes we do tend to pick up on the negatives and beat ourselves up about it all the time. And I work very much in a strengths-based way too. And, you know, but I've run sessions where people are going, yeah, well, when are we going to get to the bits that I'm bad at? Because that's where the development happens. It's like, actually, no, you're gonna have a bigger impact, and kind of if you're leveraging your strengths rather than just focusing on niggling away at that stuff that you're not very good at. Besides, it's soul destroying, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, and that, I think that taps into that other sort of theme that you touched on before, Jane, which is around leadership. Strong, you know, the strong leaders are the ones that are, you know, are not ego led. You know, they're the ones that really understand their own strengths and their own, you know, capabilities, and surround themselves with those people that are actually much better at doing the stuff that they just can't do or don't want to do, and let those people shine. And I think, you know, that's, you know, Nicole, you probably, you know, experienced a little bit of this. You know, there are some leaders that want to push people down because they're like, well, no, I'm the leader. You know, hang on, what are you doing, raising your head up? But again, you know, I guess, Nicole, how do you think businesses can better support, you know, I think there's that kind of concept of creativity kind of bubbling up through an organization and it getting sort of pushed back down because it's not, you know, we can't actually adapt to that. How can we let those bubbles kind of permeate and you know, and run through an organization?
I think they've not understood because their measurements have been not people focused or people, planet or purpose focused. They've been more shareholder value focused within very large organizations that have shareholder value. So I think not enough, I think leaders have been slow to appreciate their biggest weapon, which in my opinion is their people. So still much attention is placed and focused on these short-term strategies of survival and profitability, and it's not surprising that by far too little in understanding empathy and what motivates people to do their best work. I mean, I think we kind of just touched upon that just now, and leaders have been bred, you know, through MBA schools or whatever to create shareholder value, and their measure of success has been mainly to make more money. And how many companies are connected to schools or universities or collaborating with them with looking at new future job functions and to solve new technological challenges. I mean, they might be looking at creaming the crop of, you know, the red brick universities or the MBA schools. But my Rough Diamond program was looking at diversity, and I'm not talking about necessarily diversity in colour, but it was looking at how can we work with people who are diverse thinkers, and kind of a big emphasis on one of my heroes, which was Sir Ken Robinson and his creativity in education. And that's where I kind of got to my Rough Diamond program, which was working with kids from age 14 to 16 in schools where you would ordinarily lose them of them thinking they were rubbish about everything, when actually you bring them into the environment of a workplace, you show them what they could achieve, and it gives them hope and something to kind of look at. And then we worked them all the way through our Rough Diamond scheme. We'd had them at Ravensbourne University and School Communication Arts, and we took them right through to them when they were 14 to 16 going to tertiary education. And then when they were there, still monitoring them and still being in touch, not just having a week work experience and saying, you know, bye, you know, thanks for your time and I'll never see you again, but actually companies and leaders committed to then have them come in when they'd finished their time at university and then be employed and make up positions for them. And they would look at things so differently, you know, that it was we had 10 years worth of amazing Rough Diamond case studies. And one that made me laugh in just recently was this guy he was actually on The Apprentice, Ross Fretton, and he'd come up with this new entrepreneurial idea, and his new pet insurance. I think it's called Waggle. And I had people at Ogilvy who used to work there who weren't committed to the Rough Diamond scheme necessarily. And they sent a LinkedIn note to me to say, oh, I see that you're connected to Ross. We're looking at doing some advertising for him. Can you put in a good word? So it's you have to, it's not a short-term thing to start putting back into these incredible people that aren't necessarily educationally the cream of the crop, but they're amazing thinkers. So I think an emphasis on that, with leaders being able to tap back into a program where they can give back. I think it's rewarding in both cases. But I think there's an emphasis on soft skills that, again, leaders are not taking seriously. And I think what's happened with COVID, with all the female leaders, not that I'm banging the feminist drum or anything, but it's the soft skills, it's their communication skills, it's their empathy, it's their humility, it's their iron will. Those are the things that have kind of shone through with them being able to deal with something as enormous as COVID. Those need to be translated to organizations and leadership, and being measured upon those skills, I feel will really help businesses move forward.
Absolutely, I agree completely with that. And I think, you've developed an initiative, if you like, within an organization to inspire and encourage, creativity and innovation and change. But if the organization doesn't embrace it, then there's only so much that you can do for that organization. What you can do for the individual, however, is to set them, which is
for the first 2 years in setting up that program, I knew when I founded the lab that we needed a different kind of skill set to be working within the innovation lab. And so I'd spoken to the CEO about it, and he said, no, that is not what I want you to do. That's not how I see the lab looking. It's HR's department and it's not your department. And I ignored him for 2 years. I went under the radar and I pulled it together so that I could, rather than just say, here, look at a PowerPoint presentation of my vision, I could actually show him it working. And then he was like, oh, that's a really good idea of mine. He was joking, but it sometimes it shows that you have to get these things up and running, go under the radar, be a little bit maverick, and do it with action rather than just words, and test and learn sometimes is the only way forward.
Absolutely. And Kalpesh, I know you've been working on various initiatives over the last sort of year or so, with your Smart Tribe and Entrepreneurs Club. What kind of results are you seeing, and what's working for individuals and organizations?
So I think, look, the first thing for me is, and I think I'll go back to where I started this conversation. If everything's around measuring and hitting a quota, which unfortunately is the reason why diversity is not further ahead than it should be right now, then you're going to fail. And I kind of take Nicole's point there of sometimes you've got to be outside in to impact rather than inside out, because you get stuck in the organization and the status quo of how it wants to operate, and the number becomes more important. The two things I've been seeing in particularly the last 7 or 8 months since I left S3, but also I was very lucky working for an organisation like S3 because it had a big commitment to CSR and programs about upskilling people in communities, to the point the former CEO of S3 got an OBE for diversity to business, right, because of some of the programs we were driving. So, whether it's Generating Genius or whichever program we can get involved in. So I think the two things that I'm seeing at the moment is there is definitely a want and a desire, more so when I talk to organisations, to shift, and I think it's probably partly COVID. We are having to challenge how we think and how we operate and what the norms are. But I think the second part of it is finally some of these messages are starting to land with organisations that if you keep hiring people from the same place with the same background and the same profile, you will never change. And there are so many stats out there, and in terms of whether you look at McKenzie or BCG around diversity and the impact of diverse boards and diverse employees on performance, and how organisations that have that focus outperform organisations that don't. You know, the number goes anywhere from 19% for a Boston consultancy group number I looked at today to McKenzie have one which is 35%. You know, in terms of how well companies that have that focus perform. So I'm starting to see some challenges. Look, there are still some frustrations because the fundamental point where you can't impact diversity is if those hiring managers are trying to hire people that look, sound, and feel the same as them and think the same as them, so they won't be challenged, you will never change, right? So it's getting organisations to make that shift, and I think to some degree it's the new leaders coming through that are more open to changing the way they operate, and to some degree it's the old guard that are the problem. So companies do need to work around how they get through it, and you know, we're seeing it with the PhD community. We're trying to impact via Smart Tribe about helping people that want to make the move from academia to industry. You know, there's a diversity issue there because these PhDs straight away, no one gets them. No one gets the value that they can solve. And the irony is, PhDs can probably solve most of the problems we've got in the world today because of the way they think, but they never get a place at the top table. And via the Entrepreneurs Club, what we're trying to do is just say to organisations, say, right, you have to think about these underrepresented people. And we're focusing on technology companies directly because technology companies have not moved. If you look at the leadership, if you look at the people that are sitting in those decision-making roles in organisations, there is still a big problem. So the whole point about the Entrepreneurs Club is there is an accelerator program to help people go through and get the skills that they need over 13 weeks to give them the confidence as well. And then we've set up a recruitment part of the business to say, right, we've got this network, which you're not going to find on job boards because their CVs don't tell you what you want to see. And how do we get those people into organisations? So, and we're starting to see some traction. And the Entrepreneurs Club is just one. There are 4 or 5 organisations I know doing this right now. And they're starting to make an impact, but it's going to be a slow process still unless something fundamentally changes. The one thing I would like to just say for people is, you know, if you're a big corporate, you have to now do ESG reporting. And if you understand ESG stands for environmental, social, and governance factors, how your organisation is measuring against the things you're measuring. People can make a really big impact on diversity by actually putting that at the centerpiece of their ESG reporting. And companies that are doing it are making traction.
A little bit like B Corps.
Yeah. I was going to say. Yeah.
So I think there is. I mean, look, you know, we're still a long way from it being perfect. The fact that everyone was spent 2019 talking about it, I think 2020 and COVID coming along in many ways is accelerating how we do this because you have to think differently to get different results now.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I was talking to a client the other day about the COVID time machine. I think there was a lot of this, you know, kind of movement. A lot of the groundswell was starting to kind of grow. And I think COVID hopefully has given us an accelerator. I know, Jane, you talked at the beginning about a kind of forced reboot. I don't know about you guys, but I can't bear this phrase, the new normal. I don't want normal. I want this. I like transformation. I like disruption. That's why I work in technology. That's why I work with people like you guys. I like innovation and creativity and people chucking curveballs in and making you think a bit harder about things and a bit smarter. So I don't want normal. I want sort of, you know, transformation. And I think, you know, as you've all talked about various initiatives and some great kind of concepts, but also some great, you know, real tangible action that people could be taking. We've talked about measurement, and sometimes it's good to measure, and sometimes not so. It's knowing when to measure and what to measure, I think, and why you're doing it is probably the most important thing. But yeah, I think you know, this idea of the individual and developing the individual as a resilient, you know, kind of being that is allowed to kind of draw on their strengths, play to their strengths, but also be encouraged and inspired to kind of develop as much as they possibly can. And I think this goes back to that concept of well-being. So just as a final question, you know, as we're all constantly evolving and transforming as individuals within organisations, or whether that's, you know, setting up your own business or growing something. Just as a final put this out there, you know, what are your thoughts on well-being, and how can we all look after ourselves a bit better? I'll pass that. Sorry, I'll pass that to Jane first. Go on, Jane.
Okay. Well, I am a big fan of autonomy for lots of reasons. The idea that individuals need some kind of control, need a sense of control over their lives and their work, is really important. It's an innate human need, and it's one I think that more organisations need to capitalise on, to create systems which give people more autonomy. Because I think a lot of the issues around well-being with the way that organisations were working was because people felt like they had no control, like they were just cogs in a machine, that they were subject to all of these things that were set up to control them, but had very little agency. The work that I tend to do with organisations tends to give everybody a sense of agency. And one of the other, let's say I was looking at best 100 companies to work for. The best, largest company to work for was a company that I'd not heard of before, actually. It was called Child-Based Partnership. And the principle that they operated on was, we all contribute, we all benefit. And that idea that actually, you know, we can all play a part in the future of this organisation, and we're allowed to have control over our working lives, our work and how we do it, but also we're part of the future of an organisation and where it's going, I think is really important for our mental well-being and our fulfilment through work.
Thank you, Jane. How about you, Kalpesh? What are your thoughts on well-being?
So I think it's always been important, but we probably haven't put enough importance on it, because it was the profit and loss account was more important to an organisation than their employees. And I've seen some great examples over COVID where people have behaved as companies really well, looking after their employees, looking after their mental health. I think the key thing that's coming out of this for me, Natasha, is really simply people are going to think differently about the world of work and the world of purpose, right? So, you know, in the old days, it was you went to the gym, and the old days is just about a year ago. I'm not talking about 20 years ago. Oh, you know, well-being was all about physical, and it was all about having a personal trainer or going to the gym and working out. Well, the amount of time and effort you put doing that part of it is at a minimum is what you should put in terms of your mental well-being as well. And I think mental health is becoming, you know, specifically out of the world of COVID. Companies are going to have to look at this more and more, because it's going to become a challenge. You know, organisations need to make sure they're looking after those people that they can't see. You know, they're not in an office all day long. They're working home. You know, invariably, employees are inviting employers into their homes every day to do the world of work. So for me, it's even more important. And I do really think, you know, Jane talked about purpose, and Nicole talked about purpose, you know, and digital transformation years ago in organisations. As an organisation, if you don't have purpose, what's the point? Because your employees need to think about, why am I spending my time and my effort supporting this enterprise? And if the employee doesn't feel valued, they'll walk.
Thank you, Kalpesh. And yeah, thank you. And Nicole, any final insights from you? I know
when I wrote my book, Rough Diamond, it was about kind of turning disruption into advantage. And one of the things that I put in there, which I felt quite strongly about, was the Fearless Manifesto. And I use the word fearless in a almost kind of it's not when you're up against shit hitting the fan, but it's what you actually do about it. So I'll just go through a couple of things that I'd put in there. One is, being a power in cutting through adversity takes a special kind of stubbornness, developing nerve to be outside of your comfort zone where it really does not feel comfortable, but you do it anyway. Not accepting mediocre. Keep it simple. So don't fluff it with, I mean, you were talking about PhDs. I used to find sometimes working with PhDs, they would overcomplicate something that actually was quite simple. So they needed almost a translator. So I was always looking for a user-friendly academic, is what I would call them. There's no work-life balance in that if you are curious, you're not going to just cut off at 5 o'clock, and maybe your work hours where you feel the most comfortable are 11 at night till 2 in the morning. So that's what I mean by kind of it's the balance on yourself. Always be the alchemist in the room to kind of connect and create some kind of magic. Develop your rapid processor. So speed defines our age. So it's you know, break silly rules, or where someone said no and you think, well, actually, why? Just keep questioning it until it gets to the point where there's not a valid reason as to why. So just keep moving. If you want something done, ask a busy person. And the modern art of leverage and cultivate the speaker inside of you to inspire others. Which has kind of always been, I can send you the link if people want to, I just wrote a little Medium post on it and it's in the book.
Thank you, Nicole. Yeah, I think we're going to be running this through LinkedIn, so it might be worth posting that in into the LinkedIn flow thread. Thank you. So that people can engage with that separately. Thank you so much. I think we've probably run over a little bit there, but it was really, really brilliant talking to you all today about the future of work and the future of me, the future of the individual. Thank you, Nicole, Jane, and Kalpesh, very much for your insight and for your time. I'm sure if anyone wants to kind of follow up with any questions, you guys will be happy to engage. So yeah, but for now, goodbye. But yeah, I'm sure there'll be more to come. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Thanks very much.